All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Placini. I'm the Healthy Workplace Specialist here at Hamilton Health Sciences. And on behalf of the Healthy Hospital Working Group, I want to welcome you to Contingency and Emergency Planning for Caregivers. Before we get started, I want to quickly highlight the QR code on the screen, which will take you to a brief feedback form about today's session. Please complete the feedback form before you leave today to be entered in our prize draw occurring at the beginning of November. I'll be displaying the QR code again at the end of the session, as well as posting it in the chat. Also, just for everyone's understanding, we are going to be recording this session so that folks can have access to this really great wealth of information. So we are going to request that folks keep their cameras off and their mics muted for the duration of the presentation. And if you have any questions that come up along the way, you can place them in the chat, or we will be having a question and answer period at the end, which will not be recorded. So if you just kind of jot down your question and hold it until the end, that would be best. I'll now pass it over to Katie from the Ontario Caregiver Association for the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Natalie. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So glad you could take some time out of your very busy days to connect with us. And today we are going to be talking about contingency planning and emergency preparedness. And so actually, wait, the joys of technology here. I'm going to have a video as well. So as I get set up, just that friendly reminder that we are going to have a Q&A at the end of our session today. So please hold questions just for the purposes of the recording. And just want to confirm, are we seeing, which display are we seeing here? Natalie, I can't see you. Are you seeing the slide deck or the presentation notes?
We are seeing the slide deck with the presentation notes.
Thank you. There we go. Back to normal. This is when I should have started the recording, but these are the joys of digital sessions. So thanks again for joining us today. And really, before I get started, I do want to acknowledge the team at Hamilton Health Sciences for hosting these sessions and congratulate them for their recent award around workplace and caregiving. I think the work you're doing is very important. And I really hope that folks are finding some value and support in these sessions. We are going to be sharing some resources throughout our talk today in the chat, and happy to make those available to folks as well as we move through. So today we're talking about, what happens to them if something happens to me, a common question that caregivers face that can be a bit stressful for folks as they go through their caregiving experience. So the plan for today is really to share some common caregiving experiences. We're of course going to spend a lot of time talking about being prepared, getting organized, how to plan ahead as best as we can for those emergencies and having backup plans, and sharing some resources and supports that we have at OCO to support you in your caregiving experience. So before we dive into some of the meat and potatoes, as I like to say, I want to just share, this reminder that caregiving comes in all shapes and sizes. Your caregiving experience is going to be unique to you. So we may have folks in our audience today joining who have similar relationship dynamics or caregiving needs. Their recipients might have similar diagnoses or needs, but certainly your experiences and your stories are going to be really unique to you. So what I often say is take what you want and leave the rest. There may be some information in our talk today that really hits home and resonates for you. And there may be some tips and strategies that maybe don't connect back. So hopefully there's something in our conversation today that really supports you in your caregiving role. And for some of that context around caregiving across the province, again, just to recognize that you're not alone. We've got a great group of folks joining us today over their presumably lunch hour. But there's about 4 million of you in Ontario. I suspect personally that number will likely rise over the coming years with older populations, aging populations coming into our sphere and our space. Many caregivers, just over half, are part of that sandwich generation. So I suspect that's most of us on the call today here. Most people provide care for their person in their own home. They live with them. Most of the care happens in community. So while there is about 17% of the care in Ontario that happens in long-term care or other congregate settings, most of care happens in community by people like you and I, and others in our audience today. And of course, 67% of folks are balancing caregiving and work. And I suspect that's most of our experiences for folks joining us today as well. So what do caregivers do? I'm not going to belabor this point because I think I'm preaching a bit to the choir, but why I bring it forward is oftentimes I hear from folks, I don't think my situation is bad enough. I wouldn't consider myself a caregiver because I don't live with that person. I don't provide 24/7 care and it's not all personal care. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that caregiving is so many things. It is that emotional social support. It's that recreational support. It's the scheduling, the advocating, the navigating, representing your person or people along the way. We're transporting people. We're planning for the future. And that's what we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into today. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that as caregivers, we do so many different things as part of our roles, and that can create some impact. So there's an impact on our time. Certainly, we're making phone calls and we're doing all of these different things for folks. We're driving places and taking time away from work, which impacts our work-life balance. Time away from our families, time away from the things that we enjoy as individuals. There's an impact on our finances. So the cost of living is quite high these days. The cost of caring continues to go up. More and more folks are finding finances to be one of their top priorities or issues or needs as caregivers. We're paying for equipment, for private sector services, for tools and resources and things that we need in order to do our jobs properly. There's also an impact on our health and well-being. There's no magical handbook that you get when you become a caregiver, and we're not often identified and recognized right off the top as the caregiver, and we need to figure a lot of things out on our own. And I know many people that have injured themselves and had a hard time physically with their caregiving because they weren't trained or taught how to lift someone off the floor or transfer them from bed to chair or car to wheelchair, etc. So there can be an impact on that physical side. There's also obviously an impact on your emotional health and well-being and your social wellness. We have pretty stressful jobs as caregivers, and we can often feel socially isolated and lonely. Those personal relationships and connections can be impacted. Those intimate partner relationships can be strained. All those friends and family that offered support and help may have taken steps back, and it can feel really isolating as a caregiver. And I don't want to miss out on the positive pieces of caregiving. I think it's really important to acknowledge the great things that come with caregiving as well. I know for me, one of my caregiving experiences as a teenager for my grandparents, I got to make some memories with people that I probably wouldn't have if they didn't have, respectively stroke and dementia diagnoses. I have really fond memories as a young person sitting and working with my grandfather on his speech language pathology and experiencing my grandmother go down sort of that decline of dementia and having these memories that are generally positive to think back on. And I felt good about giving back and spending time and doing things for them because they helped to raise me growing up. And so I felt a lot of satisfaction and reward in that element of my caregiving. And so I think it's really important also to acknowledge that yes, this is hard. This is often thankless work and it's very stressful and difficult, but most of us would choose to do this again. And just sort of to round out the caregiving experience, I want to share a quick video that represents sort of that scope of caregiving. Bear with me as it reloads.
Itsy bitsy spider.
Eighteen, 19, 20, 21. Time for bed.
So that's just a really quick sort of visual representation of so many diverse caregiving experiences across Canada. So that video was done through Petro Canada Caremakers Foundation. So it's a national statistic of 8 million. But I think it does show a really great example of all of the different ways that caregiving can represent itself in our own individual lives. And I know I see myself in that video whenever I look at that as well. So let's dive into some of the emergency and contingency planning content of today. So I want to encourage you to take a moment to think about some of these pieces. Do other people in your life know what those day-to-day tasks are that you do and some of the nuances and details of how to complete them? What would happen if you couldn't care for this person, if something changed, your health status changed or circumstances changed? Maybe you've already been in the situation where you've experienced an emergency and you've had a chance to reflect on whether or not you felt you had the access to the information, the tools, the resources, the people, the support that you needed. And maybe thinking about these questions is stressing you out right now. I know it does me and many other people when I talk to folks about this. So why is planning important? Why is having these emergency plans and contingency plans important for caregivers? Well, stuff happens, right? Things come up, emergencies happen, circumstances can change. Having some clear information available in one place can really make it easier and more effective and efficient to get help and support in place. Um, it helps you as the caregiver. So many people find themselves in circumstances where they're the person who has the medical need, but they're still caregiving while figuring out their own health issues. And we want you to be able to focus on you and what your needs are at that time. Of course, it's there to support the person that you care for, the people that you care for, making sure there's some continuity in care as best as one can have it. It also can help those emergency services, the hospitals, the EMS, fire, police in some cases, those emergency contacts that you have who have maybe volunteered or been voluntold that they're your emergency contact, but maybe don't have all the right information. And it also hopefully can support creating a space for self-care for yourself, which is always a tricky balance and hard thing to find. So the first step in this is really that reflection, getting an understanding of the scope and breadth of what we do as caregivers and get that organized. I think, especially for folks who have been doing this for a really long time, this is rote, this is routine, this is just what we do. And so those nuances, those details, those things that we have incorporated into our own personal routines often become overlooked as really critical and important pieces of providing care to the people we support. So, thinking through all of those tasks we manage, what information is needed in order for someone else to complete those tasks? What are some of the more urgent care needs that this person might have? What are things that you find the most challenging? What are the things you enjoy doing? So, as we start to think about delegating and sharing things with other people, maybe we want to hold on to those tasks that we do that we really enjoy and we find peace with and happiness with and laughter with and memory making with, where we can delegate some of those other tasks that maybe other people could do for us that really frees up that time for well-being. And as we think about these tasks and reflect and organize, there's a couple things that I like to mention. One, of course, is health, privacy, and consent, which I'm sure everyone on this call is acutely familiar with. But for some caregivers, this is all new information and they don't understand why, when their partner goes to the hospital who has capacity to make decisions, is not including them in those conversations, why these people are not having access to certain information, why they can't contribute or receive information. So we do have a tool and resource available around understanding health, privacy, and consent laws here in Ontario. And one of the things that we also try to encourage folks to do is thinking about planning this together. And again, this is one of those, maybe it fits for you, maybe it doesn't. But if we can build these plans together with our parents who are aging, or our spouses who have health conditions or needs, or adult children who have the ability to make decisions and process information appropriately, then it becomes a more cohesive approach. And so we really do encourage folks to think about reflecting and organizing and creating these plans together. One of the tools that's available to you to help you sort of organize all of this is our I'm a Caregiver toolkit. There's going to be some links tossed in the chat box throughout our session today for you to have quick access to if it's something that really resonates with you and you want to explore it more. So the I'm a Caregiver toolkit is a great tool. It's got a quiz in there to check on your well-being and where you're at and how you're doing. It's also got a caregiver checklist, which we're also going to put in the chat box, which is a fillable PDF to help you think through all of those tasks that you manage. Who does it now? Usually when I filled this out or I've done it with other caregivers, the checkbox of I perform this task is 90% caregivers. We've taken on everything because it often means we feel good that it's done. It's easier if I just do it myself. But it's also in there to encourage you to think about who else can do some of these things. As we break our roles down into these smaller pieces, who else can provide that support? Is it the grandkids who can step up and help grandma get her Google Home set up and her cameras and her TV and her remotes and all of these things? Is it the next door neighbor who's going to cut your front lawn when they're doing theirs because it saves you, 20 minutes or an hour, right? So where are there opportunities to build that support in, to insulate yourself as a caregiver and build your care team? So that leads us to the next stage, which is really, we've reflected, we've thought about all of these considerations, all the amazing things that we do, and we're starting to build and build a plan. So in order to have a plan and build this out so that it's not all resting on our shoulders, we need to create a support team. And usually our support teams are comprised of two groups of people, those paid providers, that paid support, which are your primary care, your specialists, your home care. Maybe you have private sector services. Maybe there's a day program. Maybe you have a child with Down syndrome and they have supports through school and community agencies, whatever that looks like for you. Those are your providers and they're part of your team. But the natural support makes up the bigger part of your team. caregivers provide 75% of care. So we have those private sector or those paid providers, excuse me, that provide, critical supports from a professional lens. But we have this larger pocket of care that's done by us as caregivers. And so this is why we want to build out that natural support. Maybe it's the neighbor, the daughter, the grandkids, the spouse, whoever. So we need to think about who can we trust to provide that support? Who are our emergency contacts? Have we had those conversations with them? Katie, I'd like for you to be my emergency contact. This is what's actually involved in this because it's also assuming some of these caregiving responsibilities or maybe quarterbacking them to other people, right? Who can do this in the long term? Who can do this in the short term? Maybe your sister is your emergency contact and she lives in Newfoundland, right? She's going to come if an emergency happens or something changes. She's not there right away. So we might need a short-term emergency contact until the sister comes from Newfoundland, right? So what are those steps? All these questions. Okay, that's great, Katie. Now I have all these questions whirling around my brain. What do I do about it? And so we have a couple toolkits that we're going to walk through that will help you get some of this information organized. And the links will also be shared in the chat as well. So the first one, we're going to go to like most efficient information to most robust information. So the first one we're going to talk about is our emergency information toolkit. So this is that high level, emergency happens. I slip and fall. I have a cardiac event. Something changes. EMS is coming or a motor vehicle collision. I don't want to keep listing them because it just creates stress in me to think about this as a caregiver. But this toolkit helps folks understand those really critical and important pieces of information in an emergency. So it's got the basics, right? The demographic, the condition, power of attorney. What we generally recommend is that this is a document that's kept on your fridge or on the back of your door. That's where most emergency services know to look if some of these they come into on site and they need to access information quickly. So let's really quickly look at a couple of the pages in this toolkit. So one of the pages is that, like I say, demographic information. So it's got the basics, but it has a little bit of nuances in there from a caregiver perspective. Nicknames. Maybe you call your child something different and it's more comforting to them and they understand it and that's what they're used to responding to. We've got the demographics of their location, all of these pieces, current living arrangements. Maybe you're visiting your person and you don't live with them or vice versa, right? So we have some of these nuances here available to you as well. Yeah, another page that's within this document is, who knows me best? It's really important to think about this, not just maybe the person's living with you, but maybe your person is a wanderer. Maybe they have dementia and they've eloped. Or you have a child with autism who's had, a behavioral incident and has run away. So what are some of these details to think about, right? Who knows me best? Who's the power of attorney? What kinds of transportation would these people take? So I've heard many stories of caregivers of adults with dementia and they've jumped on the local bus because that's what they're used to doing. They get disoriented, they get confused, and they think they're going somewhere and they jump up. The other piece that's in here that's a bit of an add-on, which is really, again, helpful for folks if they are sort of, wanderers, elopers, are some of those personality and lifestyle pieces. So things to think about if a stranger, like a police officer or someone else, is going to interact with them. So maybe they have favorite places where they might show up. Maybe they have best ways to communicate with them. Maybe there's a good approach to keep them calm. We know as caregivers these strategies, but if we aren't able to provide that information and provide that feedback, that's really important for people that are out doing this work to know. So the next sort of level, that sort of high level emergency information. And I will say that I've worked with caregivers who shared with me that they've completed these documents, these toolkits for their care recipients and for them, and really clearly separated them so that people know, which one is for who, and they're ready for themselves and for their care recipients, because you never know when these circumstances are going to come up. So the next piece is the contingency planning toolkit, and this will get linked in the chat. And it was also shared out in sort of that reminder email today about our session. So this toolkit is sort of next level. It dives more deeply into building your care team. Who are all the people involved in that team? What are the medical history, the medications list, daily schedules, these sorts of things. So let's jump in and look at a couple of different pages within this document. So here's an example of that care team piece. And so you can bring in your primary care team, your case coordinator from Ontario Health at Home, your pharmacist, maybe you have a day program, other community organizations, your best friend comes on Wednesdays. All of those people, not just the professional folks, but the family, friends, the neighbors, the informal supports that are so critical to us as caregivers. And it gives you an opportunity to explain who they are, what their role is, and any helpful notes that might be in there. Maybe there's a specialist that you've been waiting to see for a couple of years and their appointment's around the corner and something happens and you don't want them to miss that appointment. So this is a way that you can make that notation in there. And I will say all of these tools that we're sharing, you can download them and print them out, write them out, but they're also fillable PDFs. So you can keep these documents, and we want you to keep these documents current and up to date. And we're going to talk more about what that means in a minute. So here's another page from that contingency planning toolkit that talks about the services that are in place, whatever that looks like for you. Again, you might have a child with a developmental disability and they have access to the Children's Treatment Center and to their school and to after school care and to other circumstances. So we want to update this based on your person's services. Maybe there's a routine or a schedule that they follow that's really helpful for people as they're stepping in. So the contingency toolkit is really there for, say, you have a planned surgery. Maybe you're going to get your knee replaced. I worked with a caregiver who she had a known cardiac health issue where on rare occasions, but it had happened in the past, she would need to be jump started. I'm not a medical practitioner. That is not medical terminology, but she would need to be, her rhythms would need to be restarted, which would require EMS to come and then her to go to hospital. Well, she was a care provider for her spouse with Parkinson's, and it was advanced enough that he needed 24-hour support, still had some individual skills and capabilities, but he still needed care round the clock. And so the concern there was, if that circumstance happened for her, then what happens to him? And this is where this toolkit is really helpful to those people stepping in to know what his schedule is. Where does he go? Does he go to a day program? Does he have other things that he has on the go that keep him moving and doing things and not focused on his spouse? Now, the Mac Daddy of organizing of information is our healthcare journey binder. So we're also going to link this into the chat. This is where you can keep all that paperwork, all those shoe boxes, all those purses, the back seats of your car, the kitchen counters, where all that information can go. This is a multi-chapter binder that was co-designed with healthcare providers, caregivers, care recipients several years ago. And it's a really great place to put all that information into one space. So it has that personal information, all those histories, any POA consent, all your reports, everything, all in one place. So I encourage folks to check that out. Some people have found bits and pieces of this helpful and they've only downloaded portions of it. Some people have had like binder making parties where caregivers come together and organize all of the information into one place. So the next step is really staying connected. So of course, it's great to have all these tools and documents. We have options based on whatever resonates with you. But we know that these are living documents and they need to stay up to date. We need to keep that circle of care informed and up to date. And that's just one more thing that we have to do as caregivers. And so what my biggest recommendation and takeaway is that emergency contact that you have, be it short-term, long-term, both, maybe it's a few people in your life, depending on your situation, they have sort of signed on to this role with the understanding of what this could look like for them. And they assume responsibility for taking on the upkeep of these documents. It helps them stay invested, involved, understanding what's happening with the people you care for, and it keeps you organized without you having to be organized. So what I suggest to folks is that emergency contact works with you to figure out the frequency that these things should be updated. Maybe your caregiving experience hasn't changed in 10 years. We're coasting, we're cruising. Then maybe we don't need to do it monthly. Maybe we set a phone call once a year. The emergency contact initiates that. We hop on a call and they walk through these documents and say, what med changes are there? Is this still your care coordinator? Chances are it might have changed. Maybe there's somebody else in place. Maybe you have a new specialist, whatever the situation is. So they take responsibility for staying connected, keeping these documents up to date. Because they're PDFs, you can save them online, you can share them digitally, save them in the cloud if you're comfortable with that. You can download them, they can share them with other people on the care team, whatever systems you have in place, but it's one way to take that responsibility off of us as caregivers and include those emergency contacts in as part of the care team to quarterback some of this information. Another thing that I encourage emergency contacts to do, and this is a bit of an aside, but I'll share it anyway, is if you've ever been in a scenario where maybe your person's health has deteriorated, you're at an extended hospital stay, maybe you're experiencing, palliative services or other types of significant changes in the health status of your person or yourself. The emergency contact is a great person to be that central point to disseminate that information. I don't know if this has happened to folks in our audience today, but oftentimes we end up doing all the work at the hospital or at home or whatever setting we're in, and then we spend our evenings communicating over and over again to all the different people. And wouldn't it be lovely if we only had to do that once? And our emergency contact could be that person for us as well. So staying connected is more important, I would say, than even those documents and tools that we've shared today. So that sort of covers in a quick outline some of the tools and resources and recommendations that we have for preparing for emergencies and having a plan. We want to know what we know. We need to understand all of the nuances and details of the things we do. If we delegate early, we don't have to delegate in an emergency. We build our plan, we strengthen our care team, and we stay connected. We have the tools and resources to hand off to people should emergencies arise, and then we can be as prepared as possible. There's no perfect solution, but as prepared as possible as we go through some of these emergencies or healthcare challenges. So before we wrap up, I do want to quickly just remind folks a little bit about who we are and some of the free programs and services we offer in addition to those tools and resources. And then we'll stop sharing and we'll have a bit of time for Q&A. So for folks that maybe have not heard of us, haven't joined some of these previous sessions, we are a nonprofit. We were established in 2019, so we're still sort of young, which is why folks are still learning about who we are and what we do. And we're here for you as the caregiver. Everyday, ordinary people who take care of others and don't get paid for it. I would say that's probably my definition. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We work in healthcare systems. We work with insights and engaged caregivers through working groups in all sorts of different ways. But today, I really wanted to just focus on what we offer for you in terms of support. So I shared a lot of tools and resources already. We also have toolkits on workplace if that's something you're interested in learning more about. We have a helpline that's available to you 24/7. You'll get a real live human on the phone and they can help you find information and resources in your own community, not just a work that OCO does, but whatever else is available in your community for yourself or your care recipient. It's also available in over 150 languages. So if you're supporting caregivers in your work, that English is not their preferred or first language, we have some resources and tools for them as well. We have peer support programming, we have online groups, we have one-to-one mentorship. We also have a caregiver coaching program where you can connect one-on-one with a coach who is a caregiver, so they have lived experience, but they also have professional skill set in navigation, healthcare, nurses, social workers, these types of backgrounds where we work on goal setting and helping caregivers who are really feeling overwhelmed and stuck find a path forward. For some people, that's financial supports and getting access to what's available. For some people, it's, I've lost myself as a caregiver. I don't do the things I used to do. This has consumed me. I need to find a way forward where I can create a better balance. And so our coaches will work with folks one-on-one in order to put some things in place to get you moving towards the goals that you want to meet. We have mental health supports through our SCALE program, which just started last week. It's an 8-week psychoeducational webinar series. It talks about things like, I feel burnt out, I feel overwhelmed, I feel angry and resentful, all of the feelings, emotions, and experiences that many caregivers feel and experience, but don't always want to talk about. There's a bit of stigma related to that. I should be able to handle this. I feel guilt and shame because I feel angry and resentful. That's normal. It was part of my caregiving experience and part of so many others. And so this program is there to support you by providing tools and resources, but we also have free counseling sessions as part of that program. And then lastly, we have a tremendous amount of education available for folks. We host webinars on a monthly basis. We have e-learning. We also work in partnership with different organizations like Hamilton Health Sciences to bring education to folks where they're at. We have a series on the go right now and there's a lot of text on this, I acknowledge, I apologize, through the Canadian Mental Health Association, all around strategies for double duty caregivers. So for those folks like yourselves who may be working in healthcare, providing care as part of your profession, and then you go home and you're taking care of others at home in your free time. And so we have a 3-part series that we're offering in partnership with CMHA. The first session we hosted last week, so unfortunately we've missed that. But next week we're hosting an empathic strain talk from 12 to 1. And then our last session is on October 29th around balancing work and care. So we're going to put a link in the chat around how to register for this if this is something that's of interest to you. So I want to thank you for joining us today. If folks have questions or comments, we'll check the chat, and in a minute we'll let you open up your mics if you want to share anything with us. If you want to stay in touch with some of the work that we're doing at OCO, I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. It's where we send all the most up-to-date information. If you want to connect with me personally, you can reach me at that email address there. And so I want to thank you all for coming today. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and see if there's any comments or questions in the chat.